Did you know that Black and Intellectual has a membership site now? Go on over to www.blackandintellectual.com/become a member and see what we have to offer. Valuable content that is exclusive for members only, a monthly newsletter called The Progressive Rebel, an ongoing chapter by chapter breakdown of some of the most powerful progressive books you will find, and more. Black and Intellectual is all about radical progressive politics. So go on over to www.blackandintellectual.com/become-a-member and join today. Okay, hello everybody. I hope that you are well and having a great day wherever you may be. Hopefully you are safe and in good spirits. Today I wanted to bring back Benjamin Dixon so we could continue this discussion based around reparations. Of course, as you may or may not know, Black and Intellectual has launched a redesigned website with a lot of exclusive content for members. So if you want to hear more interviews like this, that go into a level of detail and a level of depth that you won't get in the mainstream or some other places in alternative media, go on over to blackandintellectual.com and join and just check out what we have over there. So I guess we can get started. How are you doing today, Ben?
Hey, man, I'm doing great, man. It's always a pleasure to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, and I wanted to have you back for sure because the last time we talked, and it was some months back, we were talking about the importance of, independent Black media, and
Right,
so
right.
we're still kind of in that, we're still kind of in that space now where you're growing and I'm doing my thing on my end, and so it's discussions like this that you won't get a lot of places. I mean,
Yeah,
there are people talking about it on YouTube, of course, but they're not necessarily talking about it from the perspective that I or you or some other folks, want to have this discussion, or they're not. The
right.
discussion isn't trending in the right direction. I think so. That's kind of where I come in, and I know like you have a perspective that a lot of
For sure.
people value. So before we begin as well. I noticed something as I've listened to a lot of discussions about this. People seem to have a problem defining reparations.
Huh,
So
yeah.
some people want to relegate it to slavery, or some people want to isolate it to being about this or being about that. So I think in order to establish a good framework, a good foundation, how do you define reparations and how do you understand the issue?
Yeah, so I fall in that category. I don't have a clearly defined um, definition of
Hmm.
reparations, mainly because I think it's going to actually be necessary for us. So for like HR 40, House Resolution 40, they were outlining a commission to research and to actually study the best way to implement reparations and to I think something like that is very necessary for us to start getting a unified definition of reparations, whether it be straight cash payments,
Hmm.
something like a universal basic income for African Americans. Just there's so many ways to implement it, and it could just be a combination thereof. But I personally don't have a well defined definition, to be redundant, of how reparations should look. I think though we're all clear on the fact that America owes a tremendous debt to African Americans, those who built this country on their backs.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would certainly agree with that. And I know the
Yeah,
candidates from across the Democratic field have been asked if they support it or not, and more generally, if they support reparations. And so far, the response has been mixed. Like, so for instance, Bernie Sanders, I'm sure last month you heard when he had the town hall, the CNN town hall, he was asked about whether or not he endorsed reparations for descendants of slaves in America. And he responded, what does that mean? So when I think of reparations, I kind of wish I would have. Of course, there's no way in the world I would have been allowed on that in that room. But if I would have been given the opportunity to elaborate on that for him, I would have certainly said, I think reparations when we're talking about this, we're talking about the totality of everything that specifically black people have had to deal with in this country. So everything from slavery to the events after slavery, including Jim Crow, and then even after the civil rights movement, when Jim Crow ended, officially, you had a whole new slew of policies like, the drug war and mass incarceration, which honestly, if you probably include from the beginning of the drug war down to today, you're easily, I'm sure, talking about tens of millions of black people who have been impacted by that.
Oh
Not
yeah.
just the people who have been imprisoned directly, but if you think
Right.
about their family, their friends, and the type of economic pressure that puts on family members. Because you hear stories about prisons charging really crazy fees just to communicate with
Hmm.
people in prison. So like, there's this
Right.
whole system where it's not just people who have been impacted, imprisoned themselves, but the cost, the societal cost of that, the family cost of that, and people growing up without fathers in their homes and things like that. So yeah, I think we're talking, and I mean, I don't think there's a study to necessarily back this up. I'm just kind of just an opinion that I have, but it's just, we know millions of people have been impacted directly
Right.
through the prison system. So it's not
Yeah.
extreme to suggest that if you just multiply by three, a wife and two kids, we're talking about many more millions of people who have been indirectly impacted after that. So when I
Yeah.
think of reparations, that's kind of, I'm thinking of it from a holistic point of view, and instead of just purely just being about slavery. Because, and this is sort of my next question, because a common form of pushback that you'll hear when it comes to reparations is, well, you know, slavery was bad, yes, but there aren't any more slaves. I was literally reading an article from Washington Post where the writer was saying something to this effect that slavery was bad, and slavery, we should have done more about it, but there aren't any more slaves anymore, and black people today weren't enslaved. So, why should we pay reparations for slavery when that was X amount, of years ago? And so, like, what do you think about those types of counter arguments? Do you
Yeah.
think they're valid? Like, or do you think because of that, do you think we should maybe expand the scope of the discussion of reparations?
Well, we absolutely. So, a couple of things. Number one, of course, there are no more slaves, right?
Right,
Like, for
right.
people to actually say that is hilarious, right? But there's a direct line from slavery to the ills that we see in the black community today, right? And so, what conservatives and Republicans often try to pony off on us as being irresponsible, or we're not taking control of our own lives, or some other meritocratic narrative that they try to make us seem inferior in our decision making, and that's the reason the black community is in the condition that it's in with regards to unemployment, to poverty. If you look at so many of the statistics, we are the top of all of the negative statistics throughout this country, and so whereas society tries to look down on us and say that we have an issue, like they try to imbue upon us some type of inferiority. Something about us innately causes us to do these things. The reality of it is there's a direct line from the ravages of slavery through Jim Crow, through redlining, through the war on drugs and the war on crime that directly leads to what we see in the black community today. So if you don't want to address it from a slavery perspective, that's fine. Because even if you address it from the most recent war on drugs and the war on crime, there's still a direct line from slavery to that point. So, however they want to mix it, chop it, and screw it, the fact of the matter is that America has committed racially specific crimes against black people, and it owes us a debt that is racially specific. And I don't honestly care if we tie it back to just the descendants of slaves, or the victims of Jim Crow, or the victims of redlining, or whatever, however we want to do it. It just has to be done.
And I would certainly agree with that. And I've said before, I've said this on Twitter. I don't, I don't really think there's ever been a good argument against reparations. I think the discussion we should probably be having now at this point is what is going to be done to fix these problems. Because what's happening is you have just injustices on top of injustices on top of injustices that are just stacking on top of each other, and no one is actually addressing any of them. Like, so for instance, you have certain politicians like Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren. They have made different proposals, different acts that they want to, go about approaching this issue. But I notice, like, in a lot of cases, they're not exactly specific in terms of. I mean, they're good. Some of them are good universal policies, and there are certainly universal policies that I support and endorse. But
Right.
universal policies that impact everybody is not the same thing as addressing specific issues that have been, targeted towards the black community. Like, so for instance, this system has targeted black people specifically for specific things. Yet I noticed that when it comes to solving these problems, when it comes to
Yeah.
fixing these problems, all of a sudden people want a universal approach. People want
Right.
everybody to kind of have their hands in the cookie jar when it comes to whether you want to talk about land reform as a solution, whether you want to talk about cash payments as a solution, whatever the solution is, everyone wants to kind of put their hands in the cookie jar, but no one is actually stick putting their hands up to be oppressed. So I find that very problematic. And so yeah, so I'm assuming you don't think there's a universal approach to the solution of reparations then. Like, so should maybe Mexicans, if or Latinos or Arabs or Muslims, should they have, if they want to make their own claim, those claims should be separate from our claim. Like, you don't agree, or maybe you do agree that there should be a universal approach.
You know what? I think, like, okay, so you mentioned Bernie Sanders earlier. You know, this universal language, albeit things that I can get on board with, it does not address the racially specific crimes
Hmm.
committed by this country against African Americans. It doesn't. And then as you broaden out past slavery, obviously it's towards all Black Americans, whether whatever uh, whatever their descendancy is from, right? Because Jim Crow, because of the war on drugs, because of the war on crime, they start lumping in more than just the African descendants of African uh, ADOS. I can't. My brain is malfunctioning momentarily here. But the problem is that when we allow politicians like Bernie Sanders, who I like and I support, to be afraid of addressing this in a racially specific way, because of their justification, they're going to say some things, the flip side, like the conservative argument against that, would be like, oh, that's discrimination. Well, the crime against us was very specific. It was very targeted against people of African descent. That's who was targeted. And so if America is going to pretend as though they don't address things based on the specific crime, then they're going to have to explain all the times in American history where they literally did give out cash payments to people who were targeted for their identity. And so this becomes a cop out, not only a convenient cop out for conservatives, but even a convenient cop out for people like Bernie Sanders, who I support. Right. So I don't get on board with this fear of addressing problems specifically based on race when America committed these crimes against us specifically based on race. And so we can't turn around and say, oh, well, the solution is going to be this universal basic income. That's fine, right? But then that does not address the racially specific problem. Thank you. Let's do universal basic income. Let's do single payer, Medicare for all. Let's do a free education at state colleges and universities. Let's do all that. But you still have not addressed the racially specific crimes that were committed against people of African descent.
Exactly, and I noticed that it seems like people. You would think certain people on the left, who kind of position themselves as being radicals or position themselves as being basically like just a very strong leftists. You would think, yeah, some of these folks would have a little bit of a better understanding of this issue. I mean, and something that I've noticed that in terms of like the reaction to this topic is how dismissive so many people are to it. It's almost as if some people have just accepted that racism is, because it's ingrained in this country, that attacking it in this way is fruitless, so they just don't want to deal with the issue. And honestly, I like you said, I think that's a cop out, because there are already groups that get reparations, and
Yeah,
continue to this day to get reparations. And so I find it just problematic when the issue comes around to us, and when it comes around to black people, all of a
right.
sudden it's passed off as, well, let's do baby bonds. Like, I'm not saying baby bonds would be bad. It sounds like it would be a good idea, a good proposal, but that's not the same thing as something that is specifically targeted to the black community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I
man.
mean, it's
Because
go ahead.
yeah, because what I was going to say is like it seems as though, see, this is one of the criticisms that comes from the actual ADOS movement of progressives that I have no choice but to agree with.
Hmm.
And we'll do, if you ever want to talk about ADOS, and I actually have quite a bit to say about it. I just haven't been able to, because I've been mired in my own stuff that I had to take care of. But one of the criticisms that they have of the left that you can't deny is that they get the left progressives, people that we generally are in solidarity with, we call them comrades, they get squeamish when it's time to talk about racially specific solutions. And all of a sudden, all these radicals, all these people that we throw our support behind, they all of a sudden become timid and are no longer radical when we talk about racially specific solutions for descendants of slaves, for African for descendants of African descent. Like we lose that radicalism from Bernie Sanders as soon as we cross that threshold, and so it becomes an increasingly divisive topic, a wedge topic, because it's just clear as day. And so, whereas the black community in general, no matter where you come from, should be a part of the leftist movements in the United States, because the leftist movements here in the United States are about as good as we're going to do here in the United States. That is, it's difficult because we always cross this threshold where you get the radicals all of a sudden be like, I don't know about reparations. Well, then how are you expecting us to stand in solidarity with you on all these other issues when you can't stand in solidarity with us when we have a grievance against the United States of America that is racially specific? But now you, my socialist friend, my communist friend, my democratic socialist friend, all of a sudden all are like, oh, that's not really feasible, and we should do something that's universal and not racially specific. Yeah, well, address the racially specific crimes first, in my opinion.
Right, and I would agree. And then too, it all goes back, I think, to education. I don't really think a lot of people do like the proper research. Like, I'm currently reading a book right now called Empire of Cotton. It's really good. And another book that I can suggest to the audience is The Half Has Never Been Told: Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism. That's a book that I've referenced several times. Uh, we learn about slavery, of course, in elementary school and middle school and college. And of course, there have been a lot of movies made about slavery, and so everybody knows about the abuse that was done and the damage that was done. A lot of people don't know the the money that was made off of it. Like,
Yeah,
people know that people got rich off of slavery, but I don't think people understand that the cotton economy fueled capitalism's growth like all throughout the 19th century. I mean, you actually had so-called cotton capitalists whose entire fortunes depended on maintaining slavery and maintaining black oppression. I mean,
yeah.
one can make the argument that the Industrial Revolution doesn't happen without black slaves in the American South.
Oh no,
And,
absolutely.
yeah, like, and like, once you understand that history and see to know that stuff, you're not going to get that information from a Hollywood movie. You're not going to get that information from, and I have teachers in my family. Teachers work extremely hard and they're underpaid, but you're not going to get that from a lot of teachers either. This is something that you're going to have to do your own research on, and once you do your own research, you're like, wow, like
Yeah,
this is the debt. This
yeah.
is the
Listen,
cost
one of
right
the
here. Global capitalism is the cost.
yeah. I mean, that was the reward. That was the benefit off the backs of slaves. When I moved from Florida to Boston, one of the first things that I saw when I drove through actually the city was Lowell, Massachusetts. I saw warehouses from the 19th century that were cotton processing warehouses. Obviously, they've been refurbished and they were like office spaces now, right? You know, gentrification. We gentrify even our history. But there in the North, you know, everyone looks at the South and say, "Oh, the South was created off the backs of slaves." No, this entire country, because there in the North was where a lot of cotton was shipped to be refined and processed and
Mm-hmm.
used in it throughout the entirety of this country. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is a debt that is far reaching. The impact of African slaves in this country. We literally built this country. There's not an inch of this country that has not been touched by the blood, sweat, and tears of African slaves. And so when you look at the results of it, if you actually put a price tag on it, I mean, you can't help. And then in comparison to the state of Black people, right, the state that we're in right now, right? You know, we don't like to talk about it a lot of times, but man, Black folks are going through in this country, right? Not just in terms of the official numbers, the unemployment numbers, but I mean, just drive through our hoods, man. Drive through our neighborhoods. It's still, you know, we got a lot of great representation on TV. We got a lot of great representation on social media. But my dude, like, when the last time some Black folks have even driven through the hood and just actually seen the abject poverty that we're living in, and then you compare that to the wealth, because I think what people don't realize is that there's literally descendants of slave owners who are enjoying the wealth of the slaves that their ancestors kept. So if we can see a direct connection to the wealth that exists today from the descendants of slave owners, then why in the hell can we not fathom giving reparations to the descendants of slaves?
Right. Exactly. And I know you mentioned ADOS earlier, and I did want to ask you about that as well. And before I mention them specifically, because I have a lot of criticisms about about that movement, but I do want to throw this out there. According to Pew Research, in an article titled "Key Facts About Black Immigrants in the United States," that came out last year, 2018, it states that there are roughly 4.2 million Black immigrants, and since there are around 42 million African Americans, you could, if you include people who classify themselves as biracial, you're looking at roughly about 10% of Blacks in America who are immigrants. But then another
Hmm.
8% are second generation, meaning they
Hmm.
have at least one parent who is an immigrant. So I guess my question is, um, concerning ADOS, there's, and I know people are going to disagree with this, but that's what we're here for. You know, we're here to provide counter arguments. I'm not definitely not going to be a yes man to or a parrot
Absolutely, man.
to certain talking points that I just find problematic. So you see that there's this wedge that's forming
Hmm.
around the issue of reparations and immigration. Um, can we make a unique claim based on our history and include all of American history, which is what we were talking about before, and not at least at the very minimum include second generation Black immigrants who, you know, they might be, you know, being oppressed themselves. They've been born, they're born in this country. You just had the man in Texas, I think, Botham Jim
Botham
John.
Jean. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's from he has ancestry going back to St. Lucia. He was murdered by white female police officer. Like it's not like Black immigrants aren't facing oppression in this system. So how do you
Yeah.
grapple with this issue, of immigration and reparations?
So listen, man. Like I said, that's a deeper conversation that I'm going to wade into as soon as I take care of some other things that I've got going on in this media space. But just in general, like I could just speak to some general points here. Number one, the number one problem I have with the ADOS movement is the fact that they literally use right wing talking points to try to make their point. Now, anybody who has sat down with their friends from Jamaica, St. Lucia, Haiti, uh, um, Costa Rica, like I have, and I've sat down, you see that there is a division, or any part of Africa for that matter. There is a divide. There are issues. There are deeply seated, deeply rooted issues that have to be addressed, but they're not systemic issues, right? They're interpersonal issues. They're communal issues, and they can be honestly reduced down to the diaspora wars, right? Where we are competing with one another for who's got. It's almost like rivalries between HBCUs, right? If I could be so coy. It's like, whose HBCU is better? My HBCU is like, nah, we get extremely passionate about it. So there are issues there for sure. But what the ADOS movement does is literally incorporates right wing conservative talking points to deepen that divide and make it seem as though we are at odds. We are at systemic odds against people who are immigrants, right? Like, there's a systemic problem with black immigrants that is hurting the black community. When in reality, as soon as those black folks get here, they are inundated with some of the same exact issues that we've been facing since we've been here this entire time, without question. When the cop pulls you over, they do not care if you're from Kenya or if
Mm-hmm.
you're from the Bronx. You know what I mean? They don't care where you are from. You're a nigga to them, and so that's just the reality of it. Now, if we're talking about literal reparations for slavery and slavery only, then yeah, we literally have to trace who are descendants of slaves. Like, that's only makes sense, right? But there's so many other transgressions that have taken place in addition to, and this is not to minimize the original sin of slavery, which is by far has the biggest impact on all of us, right? But we still have Jim Crow to address. We still have to address. We have to address immigrants who came during slavery, but we'll get to that. Like that's why there's an entire need for research to go on about this, because we might be surprised with some of the results. We might be surprised at what mixture of African descent actually existed during slavery, right? But even if we broaden it out and we don't just include slavery, we do have Jim Crow, we do have redlining, we do have the war on drugs, the war on crimes, which are very racially specific crimes against anyone who had dark hues. Any of us who have been blessed with melanin, we were cursed by these crimes in America. So the movement, the ADOS movement, they've gotten their steam, they've gotten a lot of notoriety, and they're building, but they're building at the expense of number one, solidarity, but number two, they're doing it with the help of right-wing white supremacist talking points. And my number one problem with them is this: listen, if at the end of the day your contribution to society is actually a net benefit for white supremacy, then you've been working for white supremacy all this time. And
Right.
so if by you building up your movement, and you're doing so by underscoring, instead of tearing down these white supremacist tropes about immigrants, instead of tearing down these false economic talking points as though these jobs were going to be, or the wages were actually going to be higher for black people if it were not for immigration. The reality of it is that is literally the point of capitalism. Capitalism will always find a way to get the cheapest labor, and the cheapest labor we know of is slavery. So, using these white supremacist talking points, you're propping up white supremacy, you're propping up capitalism, which some of the founders of the ADOS movement, I know very well, or at least I used to work with her on a regular basis. She knows the problem is capitalism. Yvette Carnell knows the problem is capitalism, and now all of a sudden, no, the problem is immigrants. Come on, that's literally the tool of white supremacy to prop up capitalism. And that's my problem with it. Yeah, there's some issues between black folks of different nationalities, ethnicities, or whatever the case may be. Yes, we have to address those, but that's not the systemic problem. The systemic problem is capitalism, and the systemic problem is white supremacy being used as a tool to prop up capitalism.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think going forward, I think we're going to have to definitely delve deeper into this because I mean, there's just hours of content to go through. I just got to the point where I had to stop listening because I mean, it's like every video is about 2 hours, 2 hours long. So, and I mean, there's a lot of different problems with it. I mean, I think one of the issues as well is is it's just the unwillingness to acknowledge that your co-signing of uh, white supremacist talking points regarding immigration
Hmm.
is kind of just ignoring the fact that you know this entire immigration agenda, Trump's entire immigration agenda, is firmly rooted in white supremacy. You know, like
Yeah,
the only reason they want to build the wall, and the only reason they are rounding up immigrants at the border, and there was even something on Twitter, I want to say it was in El Paso, Texas, where they just have like just a bunch
in
of
a cage,
immigrants in a
man,
cage. Yeah, the
underneath a
only reason
highway.
underneath the highway, yeah, and I mean the only reason this is happening is because they are terrified of becoming a minority. This is about
Hmm.
protecting the white majority, and so the
Yeah,
people within the ADOS movement who think that black people are going to somehow gain something from this
right,
is just pure fantasy. It's
right.
pure absolute fantasy in my opinion. So yeah, I'm definitely glad that that you made that statement. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we end
Man,
this?
yeah, just the it's very easy for us to lose sight of the bigger problems because of how big the problem really is. And I mean that very specifically. What I'm saying is that it's easy for us to lose sight of the problem of white supremacy because of how ubiquitous and how pervasive that problem is. It literally is in everything that we see. It's in our entertainment. It's in business. It's in the neighborhoods that we live in. It is everywhere, and it becomes overwhelming to the point where you start either one ignoring it, or you just become numb to it, or you become so bitter with it that you know there's always other extremes. But I bring that up because I think one of the number one problems that we're going to be facing coming up here soon is a divide in the black community that is being exacerbated by the ADOS movement, and it is presenting a new approach to white supremacy, which is being white supremacist adjacent, right?
Hmm.
As though you can get what you need to get from this system, and it's fine. You know what I mean? Just play the cards. You're a proud American. You know what I mean? You're a proud American who deserves better than what these immigrants are putting us through, and all this language that makes them literally adjacent to white supremacy. And the problem is that, yeah, for the leaders of the movement, and there are going to be great opportunities and great wealth that's attached to leading a large movement, or a growing movement, but you're distracted from the systemic problem, and the distraction becomes the same exact distraction that poor white people are exposed to. Right? They're focusing on their hatred for immigrants. They're focusing on their hatred for Muslims. They're focusing on their hatred for black people, or their disgust with them, or their frustration with them. And the wealthiest people in this country know that if we can scapegoat everybody else, if we can use white supremacy as a means of scapegoating everyone else is the problem but white supremacy. Everyone else is the problem but capitalism. They know that those poor white people will always be poor and be happy in their poverty and will never turn around and look at the masters of capitalism. And that's exactly what is being done to the followers of the ADOS movement. Sure, some of your leaders are going to do well because that's just the nature of organizing and starting a movement. But y'all black folks who are out here championing all these white supremacist talking points, you're literally going to be in the same exact spot that you're in right now into the future in perpetuity because you're not challenging the system. You're simply scapegoating immigrants, and not only you're scapegoating just any immigrants, you're scapegoating black immigrants, which is
Right.
creating a even weakening our ability as black people. We have a unique advantage, man. Our unique advantage is that we have to fight white supremacy. But here's a movement that is now dividing us in a way that weakens our ability to fight white supremacy. And when we can't fight white supremacy, there's no way in hell we can fight capitalism, which means we are literally not changing the systemic problems that we're facing. So I would just say, like, this is a new thing that is growing, and more power to them, but it really is taking our eye off the ball, which is the number one fights that we have as a people. It has to be against white supremacy, and it has to be against the way America plays capitalism.
And I think that's a great way to end the discussion. So, where can the audience find you, Ben?
Hey, man, I'm still at progressivearmy.com. I'll have a new site up, benjaminpdixon.com, with just a little more information on me. And of course, they can find me on Twitter at Benjamin P. Dixon.
All right. And like I said, my name is Brian Lewis. You can find me on Twitter as well at _Black Intellect. Thank you.